We're just a few hours away from the start of the 2020 Democratic Convention. It's going to look and feel a lot different from what the party had in mind when it announced Milwaukee as the host city last year. Instead of 50,000 people descending on the shores of Lake Michigan, the week's speeches and proceedings will happen the same way nearly everything else has for the past 5 months, virtually. You are looking at the most important room for Democrats this week. This control room in Milwaukee will be taking in live feeds from all across the country, including Joe Biden's in Delaware, and feeding it out to the world. The latest CBS News Battleground Tracker shows presumptive nominee Joe Biden leading in states which account for some 279 electoral votes. It takes 270 to win the presidency. President Trump is visiting 2 states currently leaning toward Biden today, Minnesota and Wisconsin. Officially, these were White House events on jobs and the economy. But President Trump focused on issues he's been looking to play up in the election.
As president, my goal to restore safety to our streets and to help these innocent Americans rebuild their lives and rebuild their lives very quickly. That's what I'm here for. By contrast, the Democrats are promising to elevate their left-wing war on cops and to bring it up to the White House in the form of sleepy Joe Biden. I don't think that's going to work. They will be taking away your Second Amendment if they win. If Biden wins, as sure as you're standing, and he'll have nothing to do with it. He'll say, what is the Second Amendment? Would you explain it?
Despite Biden's current lead in several polls, the race is anything but a foregone conclusion. One of the most pressing issues is exactly how Americans will be able to cast their ballots. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is summoning Democrats back to Capitol Hill in an attempt to roll back changes at the U.S. Postal Service implemented by Postmaster General Louis DeJoy. DeJoy is a Trump megadonor. The president appointed him in May. DeJoy has agreed to testify in front of Congress next week about why the USPS has restricted certain deliveries and worker hours and removed sorting machines in multiple states. This all comes against the backdrop of concerns that the Postal Service may not be able to handle the surge of requested and returned mail-in ballots ahead of the November election. Protesters picketed 2 of DeJoy's homes in Washington, D.C. and Greensboro, North Carolina this weekend. It remains unclear whether he or his wife were at home for the demonstrations. Ed O'Keefe, Caitlin Conant, and Anita Kumar join me now from Washington. Ed is a CBS News political correspondent. Caitlin is CBS News political director. And Anita is a White House correspondent and associate editor for Politico. Welcome to you all. I know these are busy times. Anita, let me start with you, first of all. What do we know about this bill from House Democrats, and what do they want to find out from the Postmaster General?
Well, they have a lot of questions for him. They want to know all about how this Postmaster General has changed things. What is he doing there? Why is he having people work less, not have overtime? Why is he changing machines? What the president told him, if anything, what the board of governors that he reports to told him. Remember, that's predominantly a Republican board. So they have a lot of questions about why this is happening right now and why this is happening in general. As you can see, they were planning on talking to him and now have moved that up. So this is definitely something they want to deal with right now. Now, of course, the bill that you mentioned, we had thought it might be broader. It sounds like it's going to be mostly based on the post office. They want to provide the funding that they had talked about before in the bigger coronavirus relief bill. And we've seen the president go a couple different ways on that, but he has said he would agree to some funding.
Well, we know at the White House this morning, our Paula Reed asked President Trump about the changes to the Postal Service. Let's listen to that.
The Postmaster General, a big donor to you, to slow the mail?
No, not at all. Wouldn't do that. No, I have encouraged everybody, speed up the mail, not slow the mail. And I also want to have a post office that runs without losing billions and billions of dollars a year, as it has been doing for 50 years.
So first, we should note much of the USPS budget shortfall is due to a unique requirement to fund retirement benefits 75 years in advance. But Anita, how is the Trump administration defending the Postal Service changes?
Well, they are saying that the Postmaster General is in there to do sort of what the president just said. The president's been critical of the Postal Service for 3.5 years. He has said it's a money-losing operation. He wants it to be run like a business. Of course, it's not, and he wants it to pay for itself. And so this is someone who's come in there. He's a businessman himself, Louis DeJoy. He's come in there to sort of make it more efficient. And so that's how they're explaining it. They're explaining it that this needs to be more modern. It needs to be more run like a business. And he's making these changes that need to be changed. They also say some of the changes that are being made were prior to his arrival. So prior to DeJoy's arrival, that these were already in the works.
Well, Caitlin, let's get a sense of the scope here. Help us understand the expected scale of mail-in voting for the general election. And also, if there are disruptions in mail delivery, how might that affect the vote count?
Well, first of all, I think we can safely expect that more people are going to vote by mail in this election than we've seen before. We saw that in the primaries, and just like every American has had to make adjustments in their daily life, there's going to be adjustments that come with voting, because while the pandemic is still going, there are people who are just simply not going to feel comfortable going to a poll place on election day. So a lot of these states are now making plans, and without a lot of money and without a lot of time, to prepare for people to be able to do that safely and efficiently. And so a lot of these states are sending applications for people to vote by mail. Others have opted to actually send live ballots that people can vote by mail to all registered voters' homes in those states. So we can expect more people to take them up on that offer and to vote by mail as opposed to going to the polls. And one thing that could potentially happen is in many of these states where you can't process the votes until election day, we could see delays until we get results. So that's why we've seen a lot of reporting lately that we shouldn't be talking about election night, but potentially election week, election month, election season, whatever you want to call it. But I think we really need to be prepared that we might have to have patience, because just like we're having to adjust, all these states are having to adjust in how people vote. So that's one thing. And then I also think that the president's messaging on this has been very interesting, because he's essentially doing the Democrats' get out the vote efforts for them. Because when he talks and says that mail-in voting isn't safe, and according to him, he says that it has fraud, the people listening to him are his own base. A lot of Democrats don't trust him on these issues. So they could be thinking they're going to get their vote in early, just to be sure that they're not dealing with Postal Service issues that could arise or delays, and that their vote counts. And then Republicans who traditionally, especially older Republicans who have voted by mail in the past, might be listening to the president and thinking that they're not going to do that this time around.
Right. We had a conversation with Major Garrett on CBSN last week, who said a lot of the Republicans that he's talking to are worried for those very reasons that you just outlined, Caitlin. Anita, there's been an interesting twist in this as well. In addition to his attacks on mail-in voting, President Trump is also criticizing one of its alternatives. Now, he tweeted, quote, "Some states use drop boxes for the collection of universal mail-in ballots. So who's going to collect the ballots, and what might be done to them prior to tabulation? A rigged election, question mark. So bad for our country. Only absentee ballots acceptable." So if the president is opposed to mail-in voting and drop-off boxes, Anita, what is he willing to accept?
It sounds like not much besides voting in person. He does talk a lot about absentee ballots, but I've actually spent the day talking to experts about, and election experts and local election officials around the country, asking what the difference is. And really, in a lot of states, there is no difference. So you get the same exact ballot in the mail, whether you request it or whether it comes to you, just automatically. And so really, that's what this is about. This is what the president's talking about. He does not want states to just go ahead and mail ballots to people without them requesting them. That's really at the crux of this. He wants it to be limited only to those who request them. And of course, he would like people to go in person. But you're right, he has criticized many aspects, but those are the two things he is willing to accept. And he really would prefer people to be socially distant and go to the polls in November.
Ed, let me turn to you. This, of course, is night one of the Democratic National Convention. Ostensibly, the theme is unity, with speakers ranging ideologically from Bernie Sanders to John Kasich. You know, in the past, these conventions, as you well know, are really sort of these celebratory affairs. A lot is known about the outcome well ahead of time. But given what is happening in our country right now, so many crises, of course, in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, are you expecting a more somber, sort of serious tone from these speakers that we're going to be hearing from tonight?
It's likely, given that they're going to focus, Elaine, on the pandemic, the economic downturn, and the national ongoing reckoning about race and policing. That is, those are the three main themes tonight. But you will, as you pointed out, see a broad cross-section of Democrats from across the spectrum, everyone from progressive Bernie Sanders to more moderate or mainstream Democrats like Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, and Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, both of whom, of course, have earned strong marks from their own residents for how they've handled the pandemic. Others, like the Washington mayor as well, will be among those speaking. It's the Republicans, though, the four invited Republicans, that have drawn some notable attention today and some criticism. Ohio Governor John Kasich, the former Republican governor from the Buckeye State, who took on Trump in 2016, is the best known of the four. Christy Todd Whitman, the former governor of New Jersey and EPA administrator for George W. Bush. Susan Molinari, the former congresswoman from New York, who also is a former CBS News colleague of ours. She once hosted CBS Saturday Morning. And then Meg Whitman, the former Republican gubernatorial candidate in California, who now runs Quibi. All of them sort of there to sort of say to independent voters or Republicans who may be thinking about it, look, it's okay to be for Biden. And there was a notable op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today from Rahm Emanuel, the former White House chief of staff and congressman, who said that the concept of Biden Republicans is one that he hopes his party can embrace and make use of in the coming months, and try to turn those perhaps disaffected or former Republicans into lifelong Democratic supporters. So that's something to keep in mind as the party continues to debate its future, even though they are trying to put up a united front this week. It's notable, for example, that the New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted earlier today, "Great to see that Kasich's part of this, but I don't think somebody who supports or who is opposed to abortion rights is reflective of the Democratic Party." So you're going to get some of that, alongside the fact that the Biden campaign is very eager to bring together Democrats, independents, and Republicans to support their ticket.
Interesting. Caitlin, I'm just curious what you're hearing on that front, this notion of so-called Biden Republicans. Are Republicans themselves concerned at all about that when you have people like former Governor Kasich speaking at the convention tonight?
I think what the Biden campaign is trying to do, as Ed just pointed out, is change the hearts and minds of some voters who might lean Republican on fiscal issues, the economy, but are unhappy with the president's rhetoric. And that includes a lot of women in the suburbs who went and voted Democrat in the midterms. I think a lot of this, too, is just trying to say we're inclusive to everyone and trying to win over the people who aren't totally pledged to a candidate. And a lot of that is convincing some people who might want to stay home that they should actually go and vote. So I think the conventions provide an opportunity for the campaign to really address how they plan to deal with the big issues that we face as a nation, from the health aspects of coronavirus to the economy and to racial inequality, and that the more people they can get on board to say that Joe Biden is the candidate who is prepared to lead and focus on those things and have an agenda to turn this around, they're going to welcome anyone to come speak about that.
Well, Ed, it's interesting. So those topics that Caitlin just mentioned were among those in an Elle magazine interview released today with Joe Biden, conducted by rapper Cardi B. They covered a lot of those areas. However, I wonder, with respect to reporters, Ed, what kind of access do you have? Has he granted many interviews to reporters themselves?
A lot of work in that sentence. This was a conversation between two people inclined to agree with each other on a lot of things. Look, say what you will about the president and what he says about the press. He is far more accessible than his predecessors and than his current opponent, that is for sure. Biden and Harris, since she was picked last week, have been less so. They have not taken very many questions other than a few that were shouted at them at their first joint appearance last week. and one that she answered on Friday about the attacks from the president. The Biden campaign eager to stage manage this as much as possible, partly because their approach to this, and I don't know that I necessarily agree with it, but this is what they say, is look, you don't have to be hearing and seeing your president all the time. There's this general sense that a lot of voters are sick and tired of the president being omnipresent in their lives. And so try to control it a little more, try to control when and how they are seen is part of their strategy. And remember, there was a lot of concern when this pandemic began that if Biden was sort of out of the loop and not involved in day-to-day pandemic decision-making, it could affect them. Well, the inverse has become true, that the less you've seen him, the more he stays out of the president's way, the better his numbers are. We'll see if that holds up as this campaign continues, especially if the president starts hitting the road like he did today to Wisconsin and Minnesota and to other states later in the week. And then the numbers in those states start to improve for the president. That will compel Biden and Harris to get out there a little more, even though they're trying, as a political matter, to hew to the guidance of public health officials and scientists who say that distancing is more important, and putting a 77-year-old man out there to campaign could be risky. But it has been mighty frustrating to try to talk to Biden, get questions answered from him. If this were a normal period, and how many times do we say that every day, we'd probably be talking to him far more, and he'd probably be creating a lot of self-inflicted verbal wounds for himself, which is part of why his campaign doesn't mind that this pandemic has created for them a valid excuse that he should stay away from reporters. But, you know, it's certainly frustrating. We'd love to talk to him more. I mean, over the course of this campaign/pandemic, I think I've had an opportunity to ask him 2 questions in 2 of these different very well organized and orchestrated press conferences. But it's only because they put our names on a list. It's not like it's an extemporaneous thing where he's answering questions going in and out of an event. For our colleagues in newspapers like Anita, it's even doubly frustrating because he's taken very few questions from print media over the course of the last several months.
We will see if that accessibility to the candidate changes here as the weeks wear on. Ed O'Keefe, Caitlin Conant, and Anita Kumar, thank you all very much.